Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, depending on where you are in the world. My name is Sharon Florentine. Welcome to today's DevOps.com webinar, Flow or DevOps Metrics. What to use, when to use what, for your value streams. I am joined today by Jeff Keyes from Plutora and Helen Beal from the Value Stream Management Consortium, and we have a fantastic webinar for you today, as usual with these folks. Before we get started, I do need to go through the usual housekeeping items with you. So just as a reminder, the session is being recorded, so if you miss any or all of it, you'll be able to go back and watch it again. We are taking questions throughout, so make sure you send those questions in using the Q&A tab on your console, and we will try and get to as many as possible at the end of the presentation. We will also have some polls for you, so when you see those pop up on your screen, we would really appreciate if you could take a second and give us your responses. And finally, we've got some handouts for you, so if you check out the handouts tab, you'll be able to download that as well as the slides. Finally, stick around until the end because we are doing a drawing for 4 $25 Amazon gift cards. All right, with that, I'm going to stop talking, turn off my mic and my camera, and let Helen and Jeff take it away.
Thank you, Sharon. Hello, audience. Lovely to have you all here and all coming from all over the place as well. I think NNJ is probably NJ, right? New Jersey and Auckland, New Zealand, and San Antonio, Texas, and India. So we've hit at least 4 continents, including me already. So that's pretty good going. And hello, Stephen from Staffordshire. Nice to have you here. One of our fellow ambassadors, Jeff.
I love it.
Love it. I suppose we should probably get on with it. So let's have a think about what we're going to talk about today. So our flow for today is we're going to be talking about DevOps metrics and then having a dive into flow metrics, talking about how to use them to optimize our value stream, and then talking about continuous adaptation. So let's start somewhere very familiar, I'm sure, to everybody that's here. So these have been knocking around the industry for 5 years, 6 years maybe now, in their original form from the State of DevOps reports, and then the beautiful explanations of their background and connections and the data science behind them in Accelerate when it was published.
And it's great too, isn't it, Helen? I mean, they're so widely accepted now. Everywhere I go, it is the gospel that this is the way to do it. Here's your key metrics. Go measure these things. You're good.
They're very, very popular indeed. As a consultant, I've been in some quite awkward situations actually in the past. One particular customer, they had the senior leadership team that asked us as consultants to come in and measure every team across these metrics, and they were going to base their annual performance bonuses on how they did against these metrics, which is wrong on so many levels in terms of team autonomy and the right way to use metrics and having people self-discover and self-learn. So we do advise people to avoid those sort of situations. Undeniably, there is a reason for their popularity. I do think there are some limitations around them, though. We're going to explore some of that today. Shall we take them from the top, though, and just quickly talk about what they all are, just in case people haven't heard of them before?
Absolutely.
So, do you want to start us off with the green ones, which are our throughput ones?
Yeah, and throughput's the key. It's like, how fast can you get stuff off the developer's, keyboard, if you will, and into production? And so they break down into a couple of items there. It's how frequently do you reach out and touch deployment? So as soon as I check in, how often do those check-ins actually make it out of the way to production? Because that process of release is hard, and often they are the journey through various environments and testing. In order to improve that, you've got to have that process automated in some level or shape or form. And the further the automation you've got, the better you get. The lead time then is also related to that, because it's how long does it take to get from developer check-in to production. And any approvals slow that down, any manual configuration environment slow that down, validation, verification, release testing, all that stuff, that verification happens after the fact, also slows it down.
Absolutely. And those are our green ones, so our throughput metrics. So in DevOps, we're always trying to balance two things, our throughput and our stability. So we do want to go faster, but not at any cost. So we've got our blue metrics as well, so our MTTR and our change failure rate. Anything else you'd want to say about those two?
I like them because there's an implication of, well, how do I reduce my time to restore service? With the implication being, if I can make that smaller, my risk also goes down. Wouldn't it be great if my time to restore service was always, like that? Well, then my ability to take chances and risk about that deployment frequency and lead time increases because my risk isn't that bad. I might have a very small window. If my time to restore service is long, well, then now I have to manage more up front to make sure my blast radius is smaller and so forth. So I like the balance of both these two. These are really good ways of looking at the your DevOps maturity, frankly.
Yeah, and as you know, I also spend quite a lot of time in the AI ops space, and we talk about MTTR endlessly. As in AI ops, the main use case we're always working with is incident management. So if we split work into two broad categories, planned work and unplanned work, incidents, obviously the biggest cause of unplanned work, and the longer we're spending trying to fix those incidents, the less time we're spending on our planned work. And that planned work, broadly, two types, I'm going to say. One being the new features and the other being the improvements. So any time we cannot spend on unplanned work, so our MTTR, is time we can spend on innovation and improvement, which is a good thing.
Precisely.
So very valuable metrics, but we're going to explore some other ones as well. So many of you, I'm sure, have heard of Adrian Cockcroft. I think he was at AWS originally. Where he's most famous for. And he said this: the most critical metric is how long it takes for an innovative idea to reach a customer. If it takes your company months, how can you compete with an organization that delivers in days? And this is the crux of digital transformation and digital disruption, I think. Jeff, what do you think about this quote?
Yeah, I love it because frankly, at the end of the day, it's not about how long it takes developers to get their code checked into production. It's about getting ideas and value delivered to customers. And we have to start thinking in terms of the customer and what the customer sees. The customer's frankly not going to care about deployment frequency or MTTR or anything else, provided they just see new features. And again, regardless if the customer is internal, external, the value time has to take into account the entire flow of value from idea all the way to getting into production. When we start looking at it that way, it starts to break down the barriers that happen between groups that are planning to operating to the development and test, and it makes us think more as a team with that customer focus in mind. And that's the point. And if you haven't ever had the experience of doing a value stream mapping exercise, it will be truly your first experience of saying, oh, why don't we look at the whole process from idea to getting this into customers' hands, because that's the process. And it gets people aligned on really making that improvement versus just metrics that are, really kind of automation focused.
Absolutely. And the customer is key in all of this. With lean and with value streams, everything we're doing revolves around a customer. And I often do the definition of a value stream as anything that delivers a product or a service. Recently, I've been building the Value Stream Management Foundation course with the Value Stream Management Consortium. And another definition is that anything that has a customer is a value stream. It's going to sound like a tangent for a moment. Just bear with me. I've been watching a lot of the Olympics lately. It's been wonderful. One of the things that I've really been enjoying is just the cross cultures and all the beautiful names of different people coming from different places around the world. And we've got our first question today, and it's from a gentleman, I think. And I'm going to say probably Italian. I'm going to have a go at saying your name. I think it's Ferruccio Biongianni, in my best Italian accent. And I think it's a really pertinent question for what you were just saying, Jeff, actually. So Ferruccio said, I work for a company where most of our products are not web oriented. We develop tools, IDEs, compilers, and embedded. It's a struggle to explain that DORA and CI/CD do make sense for those kind of products as well. What's your suggestion to help with getting those engineers and managers on board? For me, this is really simple. You've got a customer, you've got a value stream. Your customer wants to receive value faster and more safely than they probably are at the moment. And you probably want to outcompete your competitors. And the way to do that is to be a high performing delivery organization within your organization. So for me, there's absolutely no difference between whether it's a web app or an internal COTS package or software or even embedded. The principles that underlie all of this are the same. You want to give better service to your customer to make them happier and help you win more customers. Jeff, would you say anything different?
No, in fact, I would pound on that more to say, look, there's industry best practice that is derived. One of the most vocal, outspoken people in the industry about DevOps actually did DevOps for LaserJet firmware. Who would have thought, of all the places that you would think about something that would help, improve the process and the benefits that, found. If you haven't listened to the Gary Gruber series or read any of his books, you ought to, because they're really good. Talked about that transformation and building the quality in. What they found as a benefit, even in a state where your customer isn't seeing it on particular times, but you stop spending time on the final stages, your agility goes way up and you spend more time in ideation and creation versus wasting time on inspecting and quality, ensuring the rest of the rigor so you don't screw up. You can still fix things in the journey. And that helps.
Let's have a look at some different types of metrics. Do you want to talk us through these metrics, Jeff, from Gartner?
Well, I thought Gartner did a great job as they were analyzing metrics in the industry because, of course, like you said, Helen, as people came out with the DORA metrics, everybody went towards them and said, well, let's go comp people on MTTR. That's a good idea. And there's this discovery of like, well, wait a minute. We could have one, a particular area of the team doing really, really well, and yet we're not still changing the game on how well we're delivering. And we have to look at the fuzzy front end of how software is being planned. And we have to look at how it actually goes through the delivery cycle to get into production. There was a landmark article or research note written by Peter Hyde that I thought was phenomenal. And it has taken light. It's been rewritten and republished in a number of different angles, but basically it's about analyzing DevOps through using value stream metrics. And he broke down 3 sets of metrics as part of this article. 3 different kinds of personas with a technical, think of it a la dev manager lead, let me evaluate my code. A product, meaning someone who cares about the flow of value from idea to production. And a set of business metrics that analyze the value delivery, starting to connect what the project portfolio side and strategic portfolio would promote as like, here's the value coming through, and how do we actually measure if we did what we said we could, which ends up being a set of business metrics. So these metrics are really foundational and borrow from lean. Standard principles like, well, how long does it take us to get stuff from idea to production? How long do we on average work on things? And how much crap can we push through the pipe and being the throughput? There's your first 3 metrics. As simple as it sounds, it's actually kind of hard to figure that stuff out. It requires a little bit of math, and a little bit of digging. But knowing that is key. Because now, how do you figure that out? Well, you got to go do a value stream map and then look at your times and your phases and understand where your bottlenecks are. The last 3, I think, are also really interesting. A work in progress really is a lean principle that, the more work that you have individuals doing at one time, the more time that's wasted in task switching, context switching. Whether it be development, and I've got to pull up old environment versus new environment, testing versus whatever builds I've got to get to a location, even planning and design. It's proven that the greater number of items you have at the same time, the slower you're going to be, and that's just bad. Flow efficiency, I think, is purely a calculation of how much time do things sit at a waiting state versus being worked on. There's a ratio and a little bit of math involved, and it's never going to be 100%, but it's good to evaluate how well are we doing so that teams can say, well, how do we get better at stopping handoffs? And then work profile. Oh man, I could go on for days about work profile. The work distribution, analyzing up front the functional, non-functional kinds of work is critical as we start to look future facing at what's happening in our products to have an idea of, are we improving the reliability, robustness, and automation of it versus just building in features or just fixing bugs.
Absolutely. So I think it's worth commenting as well, this idea that these are all lean metrics, and lean, of course, been around for 70 years, but we've never really been able to take the learning and apply it to our software pipeline before. So that's all quite new for us. If you haven't come across the State of Value Stream Management report, I'll try and grab a link to it in a second when Jeff's speaking again. But this is some research that the consortium published last month, about 3 weeks ago. And this, we asked a number of questions, but here we were asking people which of these metrics that we just talked about people are actually using. So Jeff, talk us through what your response was when you saw this data come out, the research.
Well, it's for me, this map to what I've been hearing customers talk about wanting, but not able to articulate into specific metrics. So with the exception of lead time, cycle time, a lot of people have talked about wanting lead time, cycle time, but when it came down to it, it's sort of like there's this acknowledgement of, I need these metrics and here's where I'm going to go get them. I was really actually kind of surprised that more people were talking about the work in progress and wanting to have that, not necessarily that they had it, but wanting to have it. And fascinatingly enough, you know, in the research, it showed these lined up really well with the metrics that Gartner defined. So it seems like people are wanting the right kinds of metrics and looking to get them. Now, Helen, you saw this too. I mean, we sort of looked this over at the same time. What were your kind of discoveries and thoughts as you were watching these big metrics pop?
Yeah, I mean, no surprise really. The number one was there. I think the flow load, flow velocity, or throughput, those two I didn't expect to be that way around. I would have expected really the throughput one sort of coming next. It was kind of the one we really struggled with, actually. It was quite funny, a little bit of history around the research. Well, obviously, we did this as a collaborative effort, and we have a research value stream at the Value Stream Consortium with representation from each of the member companies. And we all talked about which metrics should go in this list for people to choose from, and code quality got in there. And then we went to define it later. That's where we really struggled. And one of the team, in fact, the very person that said put it in there, then said, well, should we take that out because it's so difficult to define? I said it's a bit late now because the research has all been answered. Mm-hmm. But yeah, the code quality one is a very, very fluffy one. I think for me, one of my favorite ones, which didn't come up in the top 5, is actually flow distribution. Now, you remember a minute ago when we were talking about MTTR and I was talking about planned work and unplanned work. For me, I think this gives businesses so much insight into what's actually happening, knowing which different types of work are happening. And I've talked with clients about it for so long, particularly in the context of when people are trying to transition between waterfall and agile, and they know that they've got a lot of technical debt, for example, they've got a lot of system instability, and they're really struggling to find time to save time and to learn and to put in new things. So when people are starting to use agile, there's always an opportunity, even if you've been using agile for a while, but you know, you've got a sprint, you've got a box of work and there's 100% of work in there. You can immediately take 10% out for contingency, take another 10% out maybe for unplanned work, but keep monitoring it because you know you're going to get some, but then also take some out, normally about 20% for learning, and you can take some out for technical debt as well. And you can batch up, or batch is probably the wrong word, you can categorize your work and decide which types you want to do. You know, 20% for learning is not a new idea. Google have done that for a long time. They do it for innovation and learning. So yeah, that was my kind of key response to that. Let's talk about this though. So we're starting to get into the context, or starting to define, you know, we defined a value stream, anything that has a customer or anything delivers a product or service, and we talked about these metrics. So audience, you are very privileged today. We present to you the very first value stream management capability matrix of its kind. This is our draft one. Jeff and I have run it past a couple of people and it seems to make sense, but we'd love all your feedback as always on how we can improve. Are there other dimensions we should have there? Are there other levels? But should we start with metrics? You and I had a little bit of discussion because I insisted on sticking change fail rate in the emerging category, and you're not convinced that all people that are at the emerging level are there yet, are you?
I am not. And maybe it's because we primarily, at Plutora, we primarily work with very large enterprises, and large enterprises have been burned so many times with, the things going wrong, that it has emerged into massive processes that have, compounded on top of ITIL practices and evolved into massive war rooms and cabs and not that they're bad, they've had to improve things. But what has happened now is a push towards, a regular cadence that maybe is a 6-month cadence of getting to production. And, in every 6 months, you're going to blow up. If that's the only time you're releasing, something's going to go wrong. And so it really skews the change failure rate, because the number of times that you're going to production in that 6-month cadence is not high. And so there hasn't been a focus. They count incidences, how many, how many times did incidences go on, but incidences oftentimes are more a factor of production going down, not a change failure rate that we push something to production, because every time we push something to production, it blows up. At some point in time, as they get more mature, it starts to change, but a lot of people aren't there yet. What are you seeing, Helen?
Yeah, I mean, we're going to look at that, and if there's this problem that a lot of people aren't quite there yet later. I think we're not going to go through all this table in great detail today, partly because we're a little bit tracking behind on time already. Jeff and I are renowned for that. But you also have the slides, so you can go through this yourselves. And as I say, I'd love to hear from you. Feel free to reach out on LinkedIn if you agree or don't agree with it. But, this is explaining the transition from traditional ways of working to the most evolved ways of working, leveraging value stream management. So things like dependencies at the lower levels, people are just starting to realize they've got dependencies, whereas at the evolved level, we haven't just managed them, we haven't just broken them, they're all broken, and we're now completely loosely coupled. So we have our autonomous teams and systems, but it takes time to get from one end to the other. And the metrics conversation that we're really having today, we just talked specifically about change fail rate there. And I think one thing I learned a lot watching people going through their DevOps journeys is the metrics evolve. So as you move from one place to another, those metrics change. So deployment frequency, obviously extremely popular, the first of the DORA metrics. Once you're in a position that you're able to deploy on demand, though, that is not an interesting metric really anymore. What you're interested then is not how often you're deploying, but how quickly you can deploy, as in how fast you can get from idea to the idea in your customer's hands. Once you've got to that, which is your flow velocity or your cycle time, you're going to become much more interested in what's the customer actually receiving. And as Jeff said earlier, there's this tendency to push loads of stuff, become a feature factory, and not get that feedback and learning about what we've delivered.
Yeah. Helen, I do have a question for you. As you consult with customers and they're all in the emerging bucket, how do you help them just get started? Where do you typically focus them on, of all the categories of insights-driven dependencies and DevOps tool chain? Where do you typically go when they're like throwing up their hands and like, I don't know where to go?
Two things. One, an assessment. So the first thing you need to do is baseline their current state, and that helps us understand the vision and then define a next target state. The assessment's a really important tool. It should be done continuously or frequently. One of my self-professed mission is to bring joy to work, and one of the greatest ways to find joy is to see progress. So once you've baselined that current state and you're able to see yourself moving forward, that's a great way for people to become even more motivated to continue on the journey. So number one, assessment. Number two, you said it already, value stream mapping, which is kind of an assessment in a slightly different way. It's not a cross-organizational capability assessment. It's a specific understanding of the end-to-end one value stream, and you should be doing every value stream with the mapping. We're going to talk about this a bit more later, but umpteen times in the last couple of years, I've talked about DevOps or VSM, value stream management, being the next generation or the next evolution of DevOps. And the reason that I felt that is because I've got stuck with clients with value stream mapping, because it's a very physical process. It requires getting quite a bunch of humans together, scheduling it, spending quite a lot of time on it. We produce some amazing artifacts, the current state map, the target state map, the hypothesis backlog. But because it's so time intensive, people have traditionally been very poor at going back and looking at it. At the same time, in DevOps, we've really struggled with metrics. This is why we keep on coming back to having webinars like this and really looking at the DORA metrics and the flow metrics, understanding how they evolve over time. So for me, we'll probably reiterate this at the end, but a bit of a spoiler, value stream management is amazing because what it allows us to do is automate that value stream map so that we can inspect real time, anytime we want, and adapt accordingly and add our DevOps interventions. We're going to look at this a bit more now, actually. So let's think about these metrics. So this is very linear. I realise I quite often have tool chains and value streams as a circle, but for the purposes of this today, we're going to look at it so A to B. So we've got our value stream, 5 broad steps: ideate, compose, validate, release, and observe. What we're going to do is we're going to layer these metrics over it. So there's our first DORA metric, our lead time. It starts at code commit and it finishes when our new code goes into live. Then we've got our deployment frequency, which is concerned really about this point in time here at the end of release. Then we've got our change fail rate, the first of our stability metrics, which again is looking at that point in time. And then we've got our MTTR, which is in our sort of live phase here.
Yep.
Then
and what's interesting about this is now these are really cool metrics.
Mhm.
But again, it's like, well, wait a minute. We haven't really looked at the whole thing. There's more stuff that goes on, especially in that front end and in the process of releasing. It's not that that lead time is bad. It's just that there's more to it. Most big companies, for example, if somebody's adopted scaled agile, they're on a sprint cadence and then they have a hardening phase and they're not at a point of release on demand. And so until you're at a point of release on demand, you know, my deployment frequency is kind of fixed. And so then all I can do is look at how many packages did I get in, which ends up being more like a throughput and so forth. To many, it sort of reminds me of a Steve Martin joke about how to become a millionaire, right? How to be a millionaire? First, get $1 million, right? How to do DevOps and start making these metrics make sense? First, be able to deploy on demand. Well, that's a pretty tall order. What we start thinking about through this journey then is, well, wait a minute, maybe it's going to take us some time to work through this, and we need to start thinking about more metrics that are broader, because that fuzzy back end of the process is going to take us some time to transform, and it's a big step. So Helen, what are some things that we can start looking at as we start to think broader about other metrics that will help us on this journey to get here?
Sure. So the broader one is all the cycle times and throughput and WIP and flow efficiency. All these flow metrics help us across the whole value stream. So DevOps interventions we can think about. I've put a few on here. We haven't got enough space for the hundreds of different permutations that we could possibly think of. But, you know, at the front end, if we've got a lot of delay in our fuzzy front end, we can think about things like product ownership and getting that product backlog into much smaller pieces, getting closer feedback into a product owner from the customer and doing more frequent refinement. If we've got a delay in quality problems and rework, we can think about doing things like test-driven development. Test automation, obviously a massive one. A lot of people struggle to get on the test automation bandwagon because people are so busy and they don't want to stop, and the business wants all their change. And it's a classic example, and we see it all the time in our industry. Sometimes you have to slow down to go faster. Sometimes you have to pause or slow the amount of new features and changes coming through in order to spend your time on something that will save time for you later. So, for example, you might have a test that takes 4 hours to do, but if you automate it, it can run in 4 minutes. That's a significant saving if you put that investment up front. I actually want to refer to a question that we've had from Anshul Bansal from the audience. Anshul's asked, what about the level of automation achieved in the entire value stream? Is it also an important metric? Now, I'm a bit torn in my answer here. I have definitely worked with organizations that have asked me questions like, what's the industry standard for test automation levels in all the different types of tests? So I'll say 4 or 5 different types of tests. So we'll say continuous integration, functional tests around unit test, integration test, and user acceptance test. And then we'll talk about 2 non-functional tests, security and performance. And people talk about automation coverage in those things. And I think it's useful. I think you have to use whatever works for you, right? Is the first thing I'll say. If those metrics help you ultimately serve your customer better and make your business more performant, then that's all good. If they help you understand your progress and they bring you joy because you can see improvements, then use those metrics. But I would say they're not the metrics that really show us what the customer's experiencing. They're to do with your advancement on these interventions. What do you think, Jeff, to answer this question?
Yes. Well, I guess the way I would see that too is the level of automation is going to come out in a number of different ways. And it is beyond just the fact of having it automated. You need to look at the whole pipeline and was it successful? Just having it automated doesn't really mean that you're done. Having automated could be, but look at your success level of quality as well. As you look at the whole pipeline. So you have to look at all aspects. And the answer to that might actually come back to, like we were talking about before, what's the work distribution? Are we investing enough into the process of risk reduction or into re-architecture so that we can get faster? It's really hard to say. It just depends on where your product is, what your acceptance to risk is, how your infrastructure and compliance is. There's a lot of different factors that are hard to say what your specific starting point is, but here's a bunch of areas to think about and start picking them and taking them off. Recognize too, as another comment, I mean, this is a journey. You're never done. Just start shoveling, pick an area that's the most important as you define it in your journey to help you go faster and deliver more value faster. Get a baseline and start measuring those things and then improve where you can.
We've got a really interesting question from our friend Stephen actually in the audience as well. It's a two-parter. I've been thinking about it. I think I have some answers ready. Stephen says, I argue a lot that major incident management should be treated as a value stream because that is about returning a service to value and even potentially optimizing the value as a result of the incident. Thoughts? And then in addition to my earlier note, flow is easily seen as a value stream, but feedback is simply flow in another direction. So should not feedback as a result of incidents and defects also be treated as a value stream? So I think I say no, even though incident management has a customer and is a service, and as you say, it does return to value, it doesn't actually deliver value. So rather than treating incident management as a value stream, I would treat it as a place to have intervention. So for example, we've got AI ops here. Jeff's already referred to things like limited blast radius. So I would rather see incidents as something that interrupt flow, either through unplanned work or through just using resources unnecessarily as a form of waste. So I would seek to reduce the number of incidents and reduce the MTTR rather than if you seek to reduce the MTTR, you're trying to shorten the processes. But I don't consider it a value stream. Also, the feedback element for me, and this makes more sense when you see the value stream in a loop or a circle, the feedback comes back into the value stream. So it's part of the flow, it's the learning. So we talked about in the past, we talked about time to market. Problem with that, because we just shove stuff out and we don't know if it's doing anything useful. Time to value, it's like, okay, now we're recognizing that the customer's got it. But as I was corrected recently by John Smart, time to learning is actually the optimum way of doing it because we've seen the value that it's been recognized on and we've taken an action from it and done something new with it. Do you have a different response to Stephen?
On my end, I see some things where there's more of a push of if there's an outage, it just means deploy more code, figure out what the next hot fix bug is. Is that value? I don't know.
Not new value, it's the return to value. And I think Stephen recognises that. Okay, let's keep going because we are, as always, tracking behind because there's so much to talk about.
I know.
Variations on lead and cycle time. We've touched on this already. Lead time as defined by DORA starts at co-commit, finishes at live. Cycle time starts, in my mind, from idea or customer request and finishes when the customer receives value or we do some learning from it. This chart, again, from the State of Value Stream Management Report, just shows you all these different places you can start and finish. And I think it kind of doesn't matter as long as you and your colleagues all know that you're talking about the same thing when you say something. And I'm also excited to see how the technology evolves in the coming years in order to allow us to put little markers or pins in the map that say, right, we want to start here and finish here, and we're going to look at the trends between those two places over time, for example, and help us find out where bottlenecks are. Anything to add? Yeah, good there. Latest State of DevOps report came out, a couple of weeks ago. I found this really interesting. What we've learned here is that still over the years, we're still stuck in the middle. We really, really want this yellow bar to be, down there. And then we can say DevOps is done. But people are still struggling. And I am really hopeful that value stream management is going to be the key to getting these people unstuck and helping us really see what's going on and make the right decisions about improvement, see the work, and see how to change the profiles of the work in order to make the improvements. What about you, Jeff?
It absolutely is. A lot of value stream management platforms like Plutora, for example, include an aspect of orchestration, meaning mixing together human and automated tasks, which is kind of critical through this journey. As one can map the whole flow, until you get to 100% automated, what do? Well, there's going to be people in the mix. And having something to help puppeteer the people and shepherd that along becomes key, and it helps transform the journey. And then you can see, well, which people and which processes are taking the longest? Let's automate those, because that's a journey, and continue to take us further and further up this chain of automating the process of deployment into production.
Let's have our first poll, if we may, Sharon.
Sweet. I know, because we're way behind, aren't we?
We're getting back there, don't worry.
That's all right. Okay, folks, that should be popping up on your screen right now. So let's find out, which of these metrics are you using? I hope that was the first poll, because that was the first one on my list.
Looking good, all right.
Okay. Yeah. Cool. So which of these metrics are you using? Lead time, cycle time, change fail rate, MTTR, deployment frequency, WIP, flow efficiency, throughput. Boy, they are coming in fast and furious. There seems to be a lot of people are really rising to the challenge here. Thank you, folks. This is great.
Well, and it's funny because, we've all look, there's such a failure to communicate between different levels of the organization. And one thing that an executive level will always ask is, what's the metrics? How are we doing? Because the metrics are, well, that's got to be the key. And so we've always had it beaten into us that we have to have metrics to show that we're improving.
Right.
And what does it mean? Helen, are you, I'm seeing
crossing my arms a bit crossly. You know why? Because that's command and control. What we need to do, transformational leadership. We distribute the authority. The teams self-discover their improvements, and the leaders are responsible for removing the impediment. So the team should love metrics, because they're the things that are going to bring them joy. They're the things that they're used for them. They're not used to beat people over the head with a stick. They're not used to pay annual performance things. They're used by the team to make their lives more joyful at work by finding better ways of doing things.
So I'm going to close that out, and we can look at the responses there.
Cool. Shall I walk through it? That's right.
Sure.
Yeah. So up the top, we have deployment frequency at 24%. Then we have few at 13%, actually. So 3 at 13%, lead time, cycle time, and MTTR. Then we've got throughput. Then we've got change fail rate, and then we've got WIP at 8. And finally, the last one is flow efficiency, which I think isn't hugely surprising. I think I'm surprised that cycle time isn't higher. Mm-hmm. I'm not surprised that deployment frequency is there. I'm surprised that MTTR is only at 13%. I would have estimated that to be the same as deployment frequency. What about you, Jeff? What have you seen in there?
Well, what I find interesting is the ones that are indicators that people should care about would be WIP and the efficiency, simply because that's going to tell you how well you're doing. There are huge correlations between the two, as we know. The more, well, we talked about that, and I love how you pulled this out from the State of Value Stream Management report of these are the metrics that people are using.
Yeah, and this is really key, this bit of research. This is one of our wow moments when we crunched the data. So we discovered that people that work like value streams, i.e. they're arranged around a product or a service, are much more likely to be using these flow metrics than people that are in our traditional project models. And that seems very logical. It's a hypothesis that we had going into the research. But seeing the data that showed us that was true was hugely helpful. And by the way, another wow moment was that we discovered that the higher performing organizations were the most likely to be using flow metrics. So we've already found a correlation between working this way and being a better performing company. So this also shows us that at a more granular level, those teams that are using Agile DevOps and value stream principles, i.e. arranging around product, are also much more likely to be successful, which is exciting stuff. So I think it's time to have another poll and have a bit of an understanding of what sort of teams you guys are working in.
There we go. That one should be coming up on your screen.
There. So what kind of team are you working in? A project team, a platform team, a value stream team, and a product team or other? And you can say in the chat. And what you'll have noticed, I'm just going to skip back. Actually, you can't see it on that chart. When you read the report, you'll see that we had different types of team. Actually, we used some of the team topology terminology as well, or team topologies from Matthew Scouston and Manuel Pace, their terminology. So lots of different types of team there.
Mm-hmm.
Right. What have we got next? Shall we do the poll close first?
Up to you. I'm sorry. I seem to be having a little bit of an audio lag issue. So
no worries.
Just bear with me here. I'm going to
poll for a bit.
Yep, going to close that the Teams poll so we can look at that. And then just let me know if you want to move on to the third one.
I will do. So, interesting. Nearly half the audience, 43% are in project teams. And then we've got 28% in product and 22% in platform. Just 4% in value stream teams at the moment. In the chat, we've got a program manager with platform and product teams. So some multiples in there. So I think this shows me what I always try and be aware of, that I'm in the privileged position of running at the front of our industry, as in I'm always looking to the improvements in the future. And what I forget is that everyone's on a journey, and what I look at is often quite biased. Jeff asked me earlier, what do I do with organizations when they really haven't done anything yet? And I sometimes forget that I have that natural bias. We were very aware when we were doing the research that nobody would be completing the surveys if they didn't know what value stream management was, in the same way that no one completes the state of DevOps surveys if they don't know what DevOps or CI/CD is. So I'm still a little surprised to see 43% of people on the call on projects. So I'd encourage them to start thinking like value streams. You don't have to reorganize immediately overnight. I've worked with plenty of organizations where we've done things like value stream mapping with project managers and multiple people from different project type teams. So you can get started. In fact, very frequently I've walked into a value stream mapping exercise and had this little sinking feeling when I've realized we're about to value stream map a project. But it's actually part of the transition that teams go through. They learn to map out their project, and then they realize how it's a product. And then we look at how to continually deliver enhancements to what has become a product. So an example of that, my very first value stream mapping exercise was with a bank. What they were doing was it was actually a bank provider of BACS payments. And what they were doing is, one particular bank, they'd had to ring fence the retail and investment banks long after the financial crisis. And then they'd done that with one bank, and then they'd realised that they were going to need to do it with all of their customers that were banks. So we mapped that project to make it a product so that they could keep reapplying that service over and over to all of their customers that needed that to happen with them. Jeff, what did you think about that poll?
It kind of in line with how quickly I'm still surprised it's changed so quickly. The project to product kind of orientation and now value stream focused. I think the last research that I saw from Gartner was, a couple of years ago that, in like 3 years, it's gone to 50%. So it sort of seems in line, and it's going to take some time for other folks to, continue on. But the transition is happening rapidly. By comparison, Agile's been around for, 20 years. We're still transforming. So hopefully the product orientation will continue.
So Jeff and I, not so long ago, did another webinar with our great friend Mike Burrows, specifically on OKRs. I'm going to try and find you a link. I found it now. So I'm going to stick a link in the chat as well, so you can go back and have a look at it. And some of this is from that. But Jeff, do you want to just summarize what we're thinking about in this table here?
Yeah, there's, as we become self-directed teams, if you will, we need to measure and experiment for ourselves. And that means set OKRs. And those kinds of metrics and objectives that we would have, really match the things that we can have an influence on. If we're thinking about the customer, well, then we think about value realization. How's our user experience going, and so forth. And so there's a series of metrics. Go watch the webinar. It's really good. I wish we had more time to dive into this now.
We're going to talk about OKRs in a minute. So I'm just going to get to the next poll. And while Sharon's bringing that up, there we go. So are you using OKRs? You only just heard of them a minute ago. Yes, we love them. Yes, but they aren't working well for us. No, or you're thinking about it. Or if you want to say something else, just put it in the chat. So while you answer that poll, we'll just introduce you to John Durr's goal formula for OKRs. So very simple. I will, an objective as measured by this set of key results. So we're going to look at some example OKRs round. I'm just going to skip back another couple of slides, actually. So we're going to look at an OKR for the customer, thinking about these metrics that we've been talking about, one for the business and one for the team, and not for flow. And in fact, I've been working on some newer versions of this table where I've taken this row out because I think they're all kind of flow, and we've got flow across all of them, particularly customer. But iterative ways of working based on feedback and learning are good, even in the context of presentation materials.
And it's really kind of, there's no reason to not do them. Whatever team you're working on, figure out what area you want to take a swing at and set some OKRs and see how you do. Yeah.
So let's look at where people are with OKRs at the moment. So 28% did only just hear of them a minute ago. 15% love them. 18% say they've got them, but they're not so good. 28% have said no. So the equivalent amount of people said no, that they'd only just heard of them, which is nearly 60% of the audience. 10% think about it. 3%, one person in the chat has said OKRs working at less than 80% success, needs improvement. And Danielle loves OKRs, so that's excellent. So hopefully, Danielle, if you have any particular OKRs that you'd love to share with the audience that are working well for you, that would be awesome. Let's have a look at these OKRs then. Do you want to talk us through this one here, which is for a customer?
You bet. Just quickly, a statement of, here's my target goal, I will, and then whatever your goal is, and then define what you're going to measure to see if you're getting there or not. Don't worry if you don't hit it, just set a goal of what you think is possible and lay it out. So reduction in incidences and downtime, great for improving customer delight. How do I accelerate my time to value? I mean, these are the kinds of things we're talking about. So you can come up with these, but the format of doing an I will as measured by, that's the key.
And then we've got another one here, which is for our organizational level. So this is about getting a best-in-class rating by automating manual checks, getting the flow efficiency improved, and getting a number of deployment steps automated, which I think that one actually speaks quite nicely to Anshul's question earlier on. I think it also speaks to Ferruccio's, question as well about, there's nothing here that says it's a web app. Nothing there to indicate it's a web app at all. And then this one here, so at the team level, we're talking about accelerating cycle time. And, a lot of organizations have problems with shared test environments and things like that. So where we can, and in fact, I'm going to just do a plug for an upcoming webinar we have on the 25th of August with Tony Wongiovi. We're going to be talking about this kind of thing and how to change the release process from a standard release process to a DevOps-oriented release process, and what impact doing things like having test environment orchestration and provisioning, how that can really help us go faster and much more safely. So, this is our VSM implementation roadmap that you can find in the State of Value Stream Management report as well. I've been really interested in the responses we've had to this. There are key things in here that really show you why value stream management is different today as to what it was sort of during the lean years, 5 years, even more. This is really it. This is where it changes. This is where we start connecting our DevOps tool chain together, which allows us to automate our value stream map, which allows us to continually inspect and adapt according to it. Just briefly before I hand over to Jeff to walk us home, some of the feedback I've had has been really interesting from other practitioners in the field. We specifically were a little conservative and put the tooling sort of midway through. I actually think there is an argument to say you can start connecting the tool chain much, much earlier, but I don't want to scare people or get that people process tools, Helen, people process tools kind of thing that we often get in our industry. But I think there are certain times when you can apply tools to the existing environment and it's okay. The other example I've always used in DevOps is you can start using APM immediately without fear of backing yourself into bad process. Other tools like release management is one that you wouldn't just want to go and automate your existing process. You'd want to have a think about it first. But with that, I am going to pass over to Jeff, who's going to tell us more about VSMPs or value stream management platforms.
Absolutely. Yes. Hey, guess what? I'm a vendor. We sell tools. We help you in this journey. Plutora is a value stream management platform. And as a value stream management platform, we ingest data from across the tool chain. We help correlate that data, normalize it, and then give you a way to manage and orchestrate across the significant, the major portions of software delivery. How do you do intake? How do you do your release trains? How do you actually get those into environments? How do you coordinate the environments? Even your cutover. We can help people take their cutover from days to hours and organize and puppeteer regardless of the level of automation. We'll mix together the human and automated steps. The major portion of this, though, that helps you is that we've got a decision-making analytics with an embedded analytics engine that is super powerful, and a data warehouse that you can go party with to your heart's delight, with a lot of out-of-box insights and so forth that kind of take you through this whole journey. Why is this interesting? This is interesting to everybody because as you start to set OKRs and to understand the kinds of things you want to do, you need to be able to look holistically at what's happening in your pipelines. When it comes to metrics, one of the key metrics are these flow metrics. And so out of the box, we give you a series of visualizations on the major value stream flow metrics that you'd be interested in: lead time, cycle time, work in progress. And there's some interesting aspects that happen out of these metrics. You can start to look at, how are we doing over time? Are we improving? Are we improving our efficiency? Are we improving our work in progress? Also interesting on this journey, as we start to look at these metrics, is we can start to evaluate and have a conversation from a team perspective of our investment. We talked a bit about work distribution. Well, that's one of the key things that you can look at to ensure that we're including non-functional kinds of things, risk reduction, or things that would re-architect and make our pipelines more efficient by making the software engine, the actual architecture and the bits, more efficient. The scatter plot on the top, for example, takes the various types of work items, breaks them down by feature defect. Is it a risk, meaning we're doing a pipeline automation? and technical debt, those things that are re-architecting. Because remember, most of the time, people that are re-architecting are the same guys writing features. And so why do we differentiate that? We need to start tracking all work. And then what you can do is you can look at this scatter plot to say, well, which are my outliers and what's taking the longest? I.e., I'm going to zero in on bottlenecks. And you can start to evaluate why are some of these taking longer to figure out the areas and the risks that you have, set OKRs and goals about what it will take to improve those, and then go. From a product perspective, I can look at the distribution and I can look and say, I can look and say, hey, we're not investing enough into technical debt or to risk. And I know the problems it's going to create down the road, that I'm going to end up with more defects, or my deployment's going to be slower. We've got to start sorting these things out. These flow metrics have a ton of visualizations. The bottom left of looking at our workload and how much people are taking from a cumulative perspective from when we're supposed to get done, to look at the bounce rate of incoming versus outgoing. There's a relationship to efficiency that's going along there. Same with a cumulative flow that would happen. There's a ton of metrics that you need to analyze across the entire value stream, and what we provide is a way to do just that. And not only once you have these, once you have these metrics and you're seeing where you are, the next key piece is, well, let's manage the process of improvement. That's where the workflow and orchestration portion of Plutora comes super key. Model your release process, set up the phases and gates, set up the areas that are automating, the areas that are not. Automate as much as you can. Find the areas that are taking too long and then automate those. Watch your efficiency go up. This is a constant state of experimentation and automation, and that's what we do. So, our cloud-based platform is your key to managing improvement. So many people say, well, when's the right time to implement value stream management? Now. Why? Because you might make improvements, but you'll never be able to improve it to anybody. You'll never be able to say, look, we went from X percentage to Y percentage. One of our customers had a 25% increase in throughput of stories just because they were able to improve the efficiency. Can you imagine improving the efficiency of your entire dev team by 25%? It's the add, for every 100 developers, you're adding 25 more. Awesome. It's what is the value to the business of improving your throughput? That's the question. So with that, I think we'll end and see if there's any final questions.
No, we're all good.
Good. I'm just skimming through here, and I think you both did a fantastic job taking those in line with the presentation. So first of all, folks, you should be seeing a little pop-up there. You can get your copy of Discover the Power of the Value Stream Flow Metrics right there. If you are so inclined, go ahead and click on that. It is a great, great read.
I have to plug that because it is a good read. You
right?
really, if you want to get more detail and you want to talk to folks about why manage metrics and how these value stream flow metrics are used, please grab this.
Absolutely. I agree. Next, I need to remind everyone that the session has been recorded. So if you missed any or all of it, you will be able to go back and watch it again. Keep an eye on your inbox for instructions on how to access the webinar on demand, or you can always visit us at devops.com/webinars. It will be there for you as well. So we went ahead and drew our Amazon gift card winners. I'm just going to run through those real quickly right now. Our 4 winners today are Anshul B. Congratulations. Our friend Ferruccio B. Congratulations to you. Stephen W. and Betty W. Congratulations to all our Amazon gift card winners. We will send you instructions for how to claim your gift card. So keep an eye on your inbox for that as well. And if you do not see it there, please make sure and check your spam folders. Thank you, as always, to Helen and Jeff for another great conversation. I always love doing these webinars with you. And thanks so much for the audience for tuning in and for engaging with us and all your great questions and comments. That's it for me. I am Sharon Florentine, signing off.